Welcome everybody, this is Denny and Karl with Get Wisdom, and today we are going to continue with the channeling series videos, but we're taking a departure here. We are going to include some channelings, but Karl's not going to go into trance today to actually channel anyone. We're going to have a discussion about something that's turns out it's pretty timely, and it's in response to an intuitive outreach, if you will, that involves the topic of disclosure. So Karl's looked into this pretty thoroughly, and we feel this is important enough to kind of like interrupt our regularly scheduled programming, and this video is going to be released at an odd time for us and to a wider audience than what we would normally do with the normal channeling series video. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, and hopefully you'll find this interesting. And thank you, Karl, and I'm going to let you kick things off for us, and then we'll get into a little more detailed discussion about disclosure.
All right, thank you, Denny. Thanks to all of you who are watching. Yes, we do agree this is important. We've known about the idea of disclosure, which is a coming revelation, a coming out party by the extraterrestrials, that they're here. And there is a sinister motive behind it. And this is going to disturb a lot of people. We can't help it because it's rather important to understand the truth of things. So that's the thrust of this. We're bringing forward an important truth about disclosure. And this is something that directly will determine our fate, our future as a race. Because we're in the crosshairs, and we know a lot about this. We've heard about this for years now through Creator. We've mentioned it a number of times, that this is a plan in the hopper by the Extraterrestrial Alliance to come out in the open eventually and try to win us over with a promise of help and create this sort of scenario that we're under potential attack from black hat ETs, and there are white hat ETs who can save us. And it's supposedly will be the white hat ETs who step forward and make that offer, but we have to agree. And so the crux of it is that if we agree, we're using up our free will right to decide our future. We're turning it over to extraterrestrials. We've been cautioned by Creator, we need divine help to deal with this extraterrestrial problem. Nothing else will help. Nothing else will work. So we're going to touch on some of the facts and information that we've been privy to. And This is an unfolding awakening.
All right, very good. That's a great introduction. So one of the things I wanted to address first, and for some people, they're going to see my explanation of this as a little spurious, but other people are probably going to give us some leeway here and actually count this as an issue of credibility. And that's one of the things I want to address here. Is like, okay, here's this guy Denny, here's this guy Karl. They're coming out on this video. They're going to talk about disclosure. Why the heck would anyone believe either one of us? I mean, what are our credentials? Who the hell are we to be coming out and trying to tell people what the truth is about disclosure? And I think that's problematic. And the bottom line here is that Karl was a scientist. About 20 years ago or so, he kind of changed directions, became a board certified hypnotist, found out he could channel, was channeling archangels and his father at the time I met him in 2015. And Karl and I started this video series that was basically on my YouTube channel back in the day. And one of the things that stood out for me in my interactions with you, Karl, was that you used your channeling ability in service to healing. And that spoke volumes about your character and your intentions around this endeavor that you were pursuing. And I didn't see that with other channelers. And I was familiar with channelers at the time we met. And so you have a legacy, you have a background that for those of people who are willing to entertain the truth of reincarnation, Karl was once a fellow by the name of Allan Kardec, who started the Spiritist movement and was doing kind of research that kind of maps over to what you're doing now. I mean, this is like your life now is like a continuation of what Allan Kardec was doing back in the 1850s, 1860s, somewhere back around there. And he was the founder of what's known as the Spiritist movement, which is a quite large spiritual movement in the country of Brazil, if anybody wants to look that up. For my part, I've just been someone who's been interested in the truth for going back to maybe 1996. We found out through kind of a circuitous, method that my past life was as a Secret Service agent who was involved in the Eisenhower administration and was allegedly killed for my interest in what I saw what was happening at that time. This is the early 50s, and what was potentially going to happen to President Eisenhower. So that's kind of like a little snapshot of like who is Karl, who's Denny, why should we believe these guys? There's probably a lot more to the story than what I could share right now, and I invite you to do the same, Karl. But another point I want to make before we get more into detail, and something I want to read before we get more into this discussion, is that Karl and I have been interested in this subject going back about 5 years now. So in February of 2017, this is the very first channeling of someone in the light that Karl and I did at that time for my YouTube channel. And so it was with Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was a president prior to Kennedy back in the late 50s, early 60s. And this is the question that we asked Dwight Eisenhower in the light. And so this is in February of 2017. Were you close to James Forrestal, and did you agree with his opinion regarding public disclosure of the UFO and extraterrestrial information? And this is a little long, but I'm going to read it. I think it's going to be very helpful so people can get an idea of, the fact that we've been pursuing this topic for a number of years now. Okay, this is Dwight D. Eisenhower's answer from the light. I was close to him and had tremendous respect for him. I considered him a true friend and a patriotic American. We did have a difference of opinion about the disclosure of the alien presence. This caused some rift between us, but it was only a working issue in the sense of one colleague disagreeing with another. As the Commander-in-Chief and President of the United States, my word had the force of law, and so I was not stressed by this or concerned, as I knew his loyalty could be counted on. I was not aware of any plan he may have had to disclose things independently in a public fashion. This would have been quite an alarming development, and I never expected this would happen. This was really of greater concern to the intelligence agencies who saw this possibility and were monitoring him and keeping him under observation. Their reach is quite large. They have connections with all branches of the military, and that was true even during World War II and beyond. They are the most dangerous humans linked to the extraterrestrials desiring human suffering, because they are part of the very infrastructure of government and the military, and in a position to do great harm. They are believed and trusted because they are appointed and placed to have key positions of authority. The truth of things is, no one can truly be trusted in this kind of situation, because if there is not one who is an alien imposter directly, it is certain there has been corruption on multiple levels within the person that makes them lean in the desired direction. Such individuals will either not be sympathetic to an opposing perspective or will actively oppose it and fight to the death against it, against all reason, logic, common sense, or feelings of charity of any kind of divine impulse. The level of mind control is the most intense and the most successful among those individuals in such key positions of authority. This is only logical from the standpoint they are the very individuals in a position to create opposition. There have been some rare persons who have escaped their influence, and this creates the seeds of opportunity to have a counterforce and a kind of inner guerrilla activity to put roadblocks in the way of some of the worst plans and darkest agendas. But such individuals typically don't last long because they eventually come to the attention of the more darkly influenced, then become outcasts within the organization at first, as not being with the program, then are eventually phased out through reassignment or discharge. In some cases as well, they are eliminated. and there have been many, many killings to maintain a tight grip on the government and military. In Forrestal's case, this is in fact what happened. He was assassinated to prevent him from sharing his knowledge with anyone. The risk was great with that mindset and perspective that he would tell too many people, not all of whom could be as trusted to maintain secrecy and confidentiality. That was the greatest risk, so steps were taken to eliminate him. This was a tragic loss, not only for him and his family, but for the nation as well. Looking back now, it's clear that if he had been allowed to blow the whistle, this could have greatly accelerated the ability of humans to rise to the occasion and take back more power and begin to shift things in an earlier time frame and to a greater degree than even where things are now. But this is a relic of the past and one possibility that existed for a time, but was then snuffed out. All of the Lightworkers leave their mark, and all have greater potential than they themselves know. The difficulty this causes them is not appreciating themselves enough, not understanding the truly great power they have, and this is better understood by the opposition. So, when they are identified as risks and then manipulated in a way to sideline them, there is a great loss to the cause. In most cases, the individuals themselves, if caught early enough, are still not aware of what they were capable of and would have accomplished. So, this cover-up and suppression has been quite effective, but is growing in the level of friction and intensity required to keep a lid on things. There will be a turning point and a tipping of the energies towards what the light is supporting here, so all can take heart in this. It is not as dire as our words might suggest. At the present time, the light is winning, but this does not need to be maintained, and anything that can be added to the cause will accelerate the eventuality, and this would be a tremendous contribution. So that's what we learned in February of 2017. So that was a pretty complete overview of what we're dealing with, I would say.
Well, this story was a rather shocking one at the time. You didn't set the scene about who Forrestal was, but he was a Secretary of Defense. He was privy to all the inner circle discussions involving the administration of Eisenhower and the military, their planning, and of course the advent of being approached by extraterrestrials during that era. And so this changed everything in Eisenhower's thinking, and that was what was at stake. Are we going to keep a lid on this? What about the public's right to know? And Forrestal ended up being thrown out a window of a high-rise building. And it was staged to look like an act of suicide, but he had been manipulated to put him in a bad frame of mind, and they actually threw him out the window. And we've explored this quite carefully.
Yeah, that was the second interview we did.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is just, it's an introduction and a snapshot of what's been going on for a long, long, long time. This idea of ETs being here and actually controlling the world and using our governments as their minions has gone on all through human history. And the fact that we fight with one another gives us the illusion we have free choice, free will, and free agency, which we're entitled to by divine right. But it's a sham, because we're actually kind of on a prison colony here. It was likened recently in a channeling that I did to the Earth being a kind of zoological park, a zoological preserve, like a zoo. And the ETs are running it, and we're just wandering around. Sometimes we're leaving our own little cage and going to someone else's cage and so on. But it's still within the zoo. We have the animals that can roam the grounds because they're not too risky, but it's not truly freedom. So the problem is, what does that mean about us and our future? And we've been warned by Creator that the idea of disclosure represents a key turning point in the extraterrestrial thinking and decisions and strategy. They have decided that the way they can truly be done with us, because they would like to be done with us, they're tired of trying to manipulate us. It's gotten old, and we keep bouncing back kind of inexplicably. And they hate us for it because they don't understand how we can thwart them sometimes, and to some extent, kind of on a consistent basis. So they keep pushing us under, and then we bob back up, and they don't get it. What they don't understand is that we have divine support. These ETs are all atheists, and that's a key to the answer here. Because if you turn to science, you're turning to human atheists who don't understand that aspect. We're the ones who do, and don't make the mistake of thinking that we're just old hat Bible thumpers who are wedded to the scriptures and God will prevail.
Yeah, or New Age,
this
yeah.
This has nothing to do with religion per se. This has to do with the fact I can talk to the Almighty and get the real story. It's still the case we have to choose, and we have free will and free agency. And so the issue is, how will this unfold? And what can we do to help prevent the consequences of this? Because what the aliens have figured out is there's something about us when we come together and put our minds together in common cause, we get some mojo somehow going. They think it's just human consciousness, and they don't appreciate it's actually God. Because when we, in some way, align with the divine, that's when the magic happens and when we get power from. So they think if we can commandeer our free will to choose them as helpers for our dilemma and help us run our world better, because clearly we're not doing a very good job of it.
Right.
The wars are unceasing. Now we're getting turmoil, criminality, problems with more and more shortages. Things are still grossly unfair. Many countries of poverty and suffering, and on and on and on and on. The civil unrest and the strife among nations. There needs to be some kind of way out of this, and the ETs are going to come forward and say, "We can help you if you ask, but we're going to be very gentle with you. You need to choose this. And if you do, we'll help you with those problem ETs."
Right.
And it'll be very attractive because the world is increasingly being undermined. And that's what you're seeing everywhere. It's the consequence of alien manipulation through humans.
Right. And what we're seeing now is various organizations, some of them established and have a membership and following, if you will. And they're also using intuitive methodologies to promote in their own way some version of disclosure. And so one of them has made an appeal to the U.S. military, somehow thinking that the military is kind of like going to provide a turning point, if you will, and enable humans to actually survive this onslaught that's coming from a negative ET faction, with the description of there being a positive ET faction that has somehow skin in the game around what happens to humans, and that they can be asked through the agency of the U.S. military to come and assist the human race with the problem with the negative ETs. And so this fits nicely with the narrative that you just explained of the reality of the situation, is that the benevolent ETs, there are such a thing as benevolent ETs, but they're respecting free will and the rules of engagement. This is a human problem that requires a divine solution, and that's the predicament we're in with the divine human free will experiment that we're all engaged in right now. And so Karl and I are coming on and doing this video and making it more widely available in a more timely fashion to add our view as an alternate view of what's being proposed here and why we think what's being proposed from these other quarters could be plausible on some levels, but are particularly dangerous in this instance. So that's one of the reasons for us to do this right now, is because there are places where a person can go to learn about disclosure and see some very highbrow academic type of explanations for what's going on and what needs to be done in some fashion or another. One of the things that Karl and I discussed about doing this video, was an article that I wrote, and I'll put it in the description of this video, and the name of the article is What Price Disclosure? And in there, I kind of roughly categorize 4 different narratives of the disclosure scenario that we've been seeing over the last several years, and an explanation from the perspective of what Wisdom's trying to promote, and to in effect poke holes into these different narratives and why they don't really hold water. They don't really take into account the totality of the picture of the human experience as we understand it right now. We've got some pretty amazing things that happen in human history that really don't have very good explanations from the prosaic perspective, or if you go to look to historians trying to explain some of these events. And the one that stands out in my mind is the episode in the Soviet Union with kind of centered around Stalin, but it even started before Stalin's time. We're talking about 60 million people that were killed by their own government. And this is a figure that's derived from not necessarily a war scenario. That should be concluded in this discussion, is that we've got some pretty horrific things that have happened on a grand scale, that if you look at the basic human, if your brothers, your family members, and a little child in your hands, and you look at, well, what's the nature of humans? Well, the nature of humans is not to sit in an office and make lists of people who should be killed. That's not something that humans normally do. So what's the explanation for something like that? And this is where I think if people look at this with a discerning mind, they're going to start to entertain the idea that there's a non-human, powerful agency at work here. And it explains much when we look at the human experience, and especially history.
Yes, and the problem is we're so close to things, and we've lived with this all our lives, and so we take for granted this is just the way things are, and inevitably so, when that's completely wrong. None of this has to be happening, but yet it is. And there's another reason.